will not turn aside until Americans of every race and color and origin in this country have the same right as all others to share in the process of democracy.
That, of course, was former President Lyndon Johnson addressing the nation on the very day that he signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That law removed the barriers that had been designed to keep blacks out of the voting booth. It also marked the high point of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, for it was only after witnessing the violent repression of protesters in Selma, Alabama, that President Johnson and Congress were moved to act. Since then, the Voting Rights Act has stood out as one of the great legislative and moral achievements in American history. On Wednesday, however, that achievement faces one of its stiffest tests in almost 50 years, as the Supreme Court begins to hear oral arguments that could lead to overturning one of the central pillars of the law. Let's bring in Maria Teresa Kumar, MSNBC contributor and president of Voto, Latino, and MSNBC contributor Jonathan Capehart of The Washington Post. John, this Supreme Court case is called Shelby County versus Holder. It's happening because a county in Alabama is challenging the legality of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which says that 9 states and parts of 7 others are required to get permission from the Justice Department before they're able to change their voting laws. These areas are designated because they have a history of racial discrimination at the polls. But Shelby County, Alabama, among others, argue that this history is now in the past. They say Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act is obsolete and the federal government can simply trust them from now on. Are they right?
No, they're not.
Oh, they're not.
No. Look, this law was reauthorized by Congress overwhelmingly in 2006. You better believe if Shelby County could be trusted, if all these other jurisdictions could be trusted, Congress would have shelved the Voting Rights Act in Section 5 when they had a chance to during the reauthorization. Martin, look at this. In 2006, it passed the House 390-33. It passed by 98-0 in the Senate. You can't get votes like that in Congress these days. That should tell the American people that this is something that Congress believed needed to be maintained.
So, John, do you think the thing that changed all of this happened in 2008 when a certain individual happened to win the presidential election?
Well, perhaps.
Okay. Maria Teresa, we just went through an entire election that was haunted by efforts to suppress turnout, as you know, in the guise of protecting the vote. We had all kinds of so-called voter ID laws in states like Pennsylvania, the purpose of which was made very clear by one of the leaders of the Pennsylvania GOP. Take a listen, Maria Teresa.
Which is going to allow Governor Romney to win the state of Pennsylvania. Done.
So, Maria Teresa, there you have it. So-called voter ID laws weren't about stopping voter fraud. They were about making sure that Mr. Mitt Romney would win the election, correct?
And it didn't turn out so well for them, did it? And the reason it didn't turn out so well is that there were great organizations such as the Advancement Project, the NAACP, working to ensure that voters knew what their rights were. But let's get back to Shelby County. When they say that this issue is behind them, Shelby County had was one of the 5 fastest growing Latino communities in the country since the last census. Hold on to your hat, Martin. It was over 300% since the last census of Latino growth just in that county alone.
Wow.
This is not an accident. Wow. It's because they recognize that there's a new emerging population in Alabama, in Georgia, in Texas, and also where these 22 states are that passed their voter ID laws, that they see this growing demographic and they're just not sure how to capitalize on it politically. But what else better way to do it than to suppress their vote?
Incredible. John, we referred earlier to the marches in Selma, Alabama as the impetus for the Voting Rights Act. Congressman John Lewis, as you know, participated in those marches. He was badly injured in them, concussed. And here's what he says about the need for further oversight. And I'm quoting him. While some change has occurred, the places with a legacy of long-standing entrenched and state-sponsored voting discrimination still have the most persistent, flagrant, contemporary records of discrimination in this country. In fact, he says, although Section 5 applies to just 16 jurisdictions, those 16 areas are still responsible for, get this, John, 80% of the lawsuits which prove voting discrimination. He's absolutely right.
Right, and so Shelby County wonders why the Justice Department wouldn't exactly take their "just trust us" explanation for what they were trying to do. When the court hears arguments on Wednesday, we'll get a clearer idea of where the court might be going. But I have to tell you, it's going to take some amazing constitutional cha-cha for them to get around the fact that in 2006, Congress, the elected representatives of the people, overwhelmingly supported the reauthorization of this law.
Maria Teresa, a study by a professor at MIT determined that blacks and Hispanics waited almost twice as long on average as whites did to vote just in last year's election. That seems to me, Maria Teresa, to suggest that at the very least, the historical legacy which made Section 5 necessary back in '65 is still with us today, isn't it?
Not as only a legacy. Waiting in line for more than 3 or 4 hours is a type of poll tax, because basically you're wasting wages. And the fact that African Americans and Latinos and other low-income communities had to wait in line, it was purposeful. And I think that that's why we need to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act and make sure that the Supreme Court upholds it, because otherwise, with the increased changing demographics, you're going to continue seeing the Republicans trying to fight for their right to be present at the table. But unless they modernize, and that means not winning elections, but modernize, basically stealing the vote isn't the way to do it.
Hear, hear. Maria Teresa Kumar and Jonathan Capehart, thank you both.